This is Live Life Love. Hello and welcome to the Live Life Love podcast. This podcast is all about living a life you love and living your life full of love, particularly in the digital age. So today I'm going to be talking about mostly a little bit more of current events and current information that I have seen flooding social media and how that information does not always reflect truth and how best to spot and confirm information and its sources. So this will be kind of a spin-off of my episode on internet literacy. If you have not listened to that episode, I encourage you to listen to that one, maybe before this one, but it's not a prerequisite or anything like that. I also will say that I will be talking about some more sensitive topics that may not be suitable for all listeners. And this is actually a point that I want to make, is that currently on social media, there are a lot of sensitive topics being discussed, and obviously platforms like Instagram and YouTube and TikTok have ways that they identify sensitive topics because these are apps that a lot of children and minors are on, and creators, in order to not get their content removed, use words to censor themselves, kind of like using words like grape to reference sexual assault in order to allow their content to live on the platform. And I think one thing that I have never seen acknowledged or talked about is that there are still children on these apps, and the reason those words are censored on these apps is because there is no, enforced regulation that prevents children from going on them. Most parts of the countries currently. There are some policies that are either being considered in some places, or Australia has limited or made a law that children cannot be on social media up to a certain age. I will say that it wasn't super successful. The different apps use different ways to regulate this, and most kids just found a way around them. I think a lot of the backlash is just coming from Gen Z now being adult and being like, social media really messed up my life, and children should not be on these apps. But in the realm of that, ultimately the truth is that they are on these apps, and they are being exposed to so much, rated R material, highly mature material, just because it is, currently what is in the news. There's circulation of videos where people are being killed, so much conversation around the Epstein files and what lives in those files and what happened to the survivors and victims of those crimes. And children are just being exposed to this willy-nilly. I encourage if you are a creator, to create, like a disclaimer saying before, if you are an adult, I know it's very hard to regulate your child's technology usage, but I think it is important to be aware that children could be being exposed to this, which could cause them psychological damage that you should be aware of, that they might be experiencing, or very confused by the information that they are consuming on the internet, purely because it's very unregulated. And of course, there's just a balance of free speech versus protection of children with what kind of content that they are exposed to. So the main focus that I'm going to be addressing is essentially, I wouldn't say we are in quite a state of mass hysteria. There is like a little bit of mass hysteria that I will say is going on. And it's important to remember essentially what the source is and whoever is sharing this information, what are their motivations? And I will say that there are a ton of creators out there that are focused on spreading information and, just educating people and keeping them aware. But sometimes they're still pulling their information from maybe creators who are trying to profit off of sensationality. And this is very common currently, how social media has moved very much into a way for a lot of people to make money. And sensationality has always been a great way to grab people and get them to look at whatever you are selling. This has been seen in magazines for years, YouTube videos with their clickbaity titles. So obviously not something very new, but now we are talking about a time where a lot of people aren't necessarily trusting the press or newspapers, and information is coming from people on the internet who are very unregulated. You don't always know what their motives are. Of course, if you are more familiar with that creator, you can say that maybe they are more likely to be sharing true information with you and be a reliable source once you have vetted them, multiple times. But if you are just on your For You page and you see these sensationalized videos or images and there's not really a reference to anything, I'm specifically talking in information regarding the Epstein files. If anybody, claims that something is in the Epstein files, they should be able to link to the exact file name where they found that information. And so that is a good indication then that that information is true, and you can look that up to confirm. I have seen videos and images that are AI, that are old art projects or old news, particularly when it comes to some of the cannibalization claims. I don't think I've ever seen a real image that substantiates this. There are a lot of these images where they had to, I don't remember the exact details, but they had to put a bunch of babies on a plane to save them. I think it was the Philippines, but I should check myself on this, and I should have done more research here. But those images are not related to Epstein at all, and so it's very important to be aware of that. And in no way is me debunking some of the things that have come out on Epstein, saying that, the claims behind those images are untrue in the way. I just want people to be aware that the evidence and the accounts that are spreading that are looking to profit off of spreading misinformation and sensationalizing, although it is pretty sensational just by itself, but creating more stir and outrage and manipulating people's emotions. And I think this is a very predatory and gross practice. A conspiracy theorist might say that if I was someone who was called out in the Epstein files, publish a bunch of false information out there, and then it calls into question what is true and what is false and makes it harder for people to even discern what was true. And then they can go back and claim that a lot of things were false. And I will say that is pretty conspiracy theory of me, but it is also something that could be very real. And it's very important to be aware of what information is true and what information is false. Now, you also have to be thinking when you process information about the Epstein files. If someone is showing you the literal file and source of wherever they're making their conclusions, because I see a lot of people making conclusions about things and talking about that as if that is the truth. But different people can come to different conclusions from reading or processing the same article. So I do think people should take that into consideration as well. But if someone is just saying something without showing the actual file, I consider that a little bit of a red flag, because you just don't know where that information is coming from. or if they're showing screenshots of the file. And there was one file that is anonymous tip claims. And if you have heard the horrendous claim about Donald Trump measuring children with his hands, I do not want to go into super details here. It's very disgusting, very abhorrent claim. This was from an anonymous tip line, which anybody can call into, anybody can make a claim. And I personally think that this claim might not be true. Of course, I don't think that means that Trump is innocent in any way. Honestly, it should come to no surprise to anyone that he is in the Epstein files. And being in the Epstein file doesn't even add, in my opinion, more evidence for his misconduct towards women and children. It's important to note that Trump has been held civilly liable for sexual assault against Eugene Carroll already. He also has openly bragged about going into the changing rooms of girls during pageants where there were underage girls changing in those rooms, and he would just walk into those changing rooms because he believed that was his right, and he has openly talked about this. I'm sure everybody remembers that voice recording of him saying you can just grab him by the P word like a kitty cat, and like that information is already out there. He's told a young girl that he would be dating her in 10 years. So honestly, it should come to nobody's surprise if he is in the Epstein files. All this information has pretty much already been out there about Donald Trump's alleged misconduct with women. And so obviously there has been nothing done about that already. So honestly, I doubt that anything is going to come from the Epstein files being released, except maybe some people will view it as a more true source rather than Trump's mouth himself, which if they do, that's their prerogative, that's fine. It's important to note the character of these people and how you feel about that and how that informs your voting and where your line is on what is right and what is wrong. Now, I have also seen some concerning movement towards anti-Jew rhetoric because of the Epstein files, because Epstein was a Jew, and just like the language he uses, he's connected to high up people in Israel. But honestly, that is not a reason to hate all Jews. I want to call that out, that it's very important that you recognize that the actions of a few elite of a group of people or a few powerful people does not indicate a whole people's ideologies or anything like that. And there have been like a lot of religious conspiracies out there. It's important to not let the line between conspiracy and truth blur here too much. That doesn't mean that conspiracies aren't grounded in some truth, but there is still a lot that we do not know. And I know there have been a lot of, I guess, satanic panic kind of going on currently. I think part of it was due to Epstein's bank account being called Ball. And it's important to note that there is some speculation that that could have been just like a printing error, that it should have said bank name instead of Ball name. And I also want to call out that Baal essentially just means my Lord in Hebrew. It does not reference a specific deity, but is essentially it means God. It's like essentially a precursor to whatever the god. It's like Baal and then the name of the god. And I think biblically it has been commonly used to reference false gods from the Abrahamic God. So just want to call that out. I'm not saying that there was necessarily not any evil religious ceremony going on with some of the information and behavior that is revealed in the Epstein files, but I do want to debunk that one thing that I have seen. Now, Another thing that I have seen a lot of misinformation swirling around, it's not just the Epstein files. There's so much going on right now that there is so much information that is being released. That is why this episode is going to be quite a bit maybe longer than my usual episodes, just because there is so much to debunk here, and I really want people to be aware and informed of what is true and what is not true, so that we can really hone in on where the issues actually are instead of creating swirl on these unsubstantiated issues. And that doesn't mean those unsubstantiated issues aren't actually true and won't come out after we address what we know is actually true. So the other thing that I've seen a lot of misinformation on is the Heritage Foundation's Family First policy that they proposed in their Project 2026. And I personally, after seeing some information on it online of this woman claiming that essentially people would be taxed before they turned 30, and if they were not married, I was like, that's crazy. I went and read the entire article. So I want to talk about it a little bit because I see a lot of people making assumptions beyond what the actual policy that was being proposed in that article was. I'm also seeing a lot of people, if they just say something is in that article without actually showing the text, then I couldn't really even find how they were even coming to that conclusion, or they were jumping ahead like 10 steps. I will admit, the whole article, the undertones of it were pretty gross. Honestly, my opinion is that whoever wrote it does not understand love. Like, people get married because they love someone, and then they have children because they want to start a family with that someone, and they were treating it very methodically of like, oh, this is how we fix it. They were saying this causes this instead of recognizing that correlation does not mean causation. Honestly, not to be super mean to whoever wrote it, but the whole thing felt very naive, like something a teenager would write and propose, in my personal opinion. And there were some more concerning policies, like essentially encouraging people to marry by giving them, making them have equal access to welfare programs. Now, there was also some talk of removing welfare programs, so making them more specific, and it seems like rewarding families more than individuals, which is semi-problematic. I've also seen a lot of misinformation around it about sending people to these marriage boot camps. They're never talked about sending single people to those marriage boot camps. It was always talked about these marriage boot camps as a place where cohabiting couples could go to work out their issues if they already are living together and have children, in order for them to get married and create a stable home for that child. Honestly, I don't really know what the difference is societally between a couple cohabitating with children versus legally married. I guess there are some legal protections there, but there isn't actually much of a difference there. And I don't think, even according to all the other data and things that they were presenting in their piece, that would even solve the issue that they're looking to solve. And they also talked, the whole tax before 30, they were actually just talking about giving couples who married before 30 a large, an amount of money, as well as when they have children young, giving them a large amount of money. And I guess technically you can think of this as everybody who doesn't get married paying for these people. I actually don't think that is necessarily, the worst policy, but I also think it goes against a lot of conservative values of wanting to cut back on welfare programs. If you are more of a conservative, I consider myself less so, but I don't want to polarize anybody here. And then the most concerning sentence that is true from that is they pretty much said we should be teaching children that the formula for a successful life is go to high school, get married, have children, and you're guaranteed a happy life, which I just do not think is true at all. I also see a lot of people calling out that it seemed to target women's education more than men. There may have been some undertones of that, but they never outright said that. And I think if that becomes a problem, there will be a lot of outcry, and maybe getting ahead of it is useful, but right now, that is not a claim in their policy right now. And keeping women from working, there was some talk of policy to increase parental paid leave, which to me, on the surface level, that does not sound like a bad thing. If that is encouraging women to stop working altogether, that is when we have a larger problem. And I will say that there were a few more sexist undertones throughout the piece as well. It felt more misinformed than insidious, but I do want to recognize that misinformation can lead to insidious actions, even if that was not the intention. I encourage you to read the whole thing for yourself. I know it's super long, but just be aware and be skeptical of any claims that you see that are not quoting direct language, because I can also see how reading that piece could be very upsetting to women and that they make large jumps into things that the policy wasn't exactly claiming. And that doesn't mean that's not part of the greater plan, but the policy proposed never did anything that set off huge alarm bells for me and indicated any removal of women's rights or single people's rights, except maybe the welfare programs. That might be one area where it is a little bit concerning. Especially, they want to cut back on essentially single mothers' welfare programs to encourage those women to marry. But I don't think the problem there is necessarily single mothers, because they're the ones that are staying with the children. Specifically, taking away their resources, might drive them to cohabitate with a man who is dangerous and puts the lives of their children in danger, or things like that. They also encouraged blue laws, more of them, to make more people go to church. Blue laws are the shutting down of businesses on Sunday to allow people to go to church. But I don't think just doing that is going to encourage people to go to church at all and get married, because they say people in church are more likely to get married. And again, that is a very much of a correlation does not equal causation thing. And if you know anything about religious values, they're just more encouraging of marriage and staying in those marriages and things like that versus more secular people. And it's just important to notice those differences when referencing any studies in this area that I didn't feel was properly addressed in the article at all. And I think the biggest thing that is concerning about that article is the government having oversight into something very personal, such as marriage, that should be grounded in two people's love for each other. Obviously, the article only focused on how children should grow up in a house with a mom and a dad, but obviously a healthy family can look like a very different ways, and one person raising children obviously is going to be harder on everybody in those circumstances, but that doesn't mean that there's a quick fix to take away their welfare, to encourage them to, have a man in the household when those men willfully left those households or abandoned their family or were abusive to them in some ways. I think that leads me to the last concerning thing. There was some talk about divorce and, making it harder to get divorced, that it was too easy to get divorced currently, which, obviously you shouldn't make it too hard. If people are in difficult situations or unhappy, I think it's their right to get a divorce, and policing and putting laws in place regarding marriage, unless they are specifically protecting individuals from abuse, it gives me a little bit of an ick, just because people should be able to choose who they love and who they marry. Ultimately, I believe that. We don't want arranged marriages out here or, forcing anybody to have a family if that's not something that they want. So the final thing I just wanted to call out, this was information that I saw a while ago. It was like a very trending post. That was something that I just want to talk about what I did there and how I debunked this information that I saw. It was about Indiana, I believe, legalizing execution by gas and by firing squad, and a claim that they were building a gas chamber, which made people afraid that they were going to start executing people in ICE camps through these gas chambers. So I quickly, I had to look this up on the internet. And what I found is that, first of all, I couldn't find anything about the building of the gas chamber. But I could find where the law, it had not passed through chamber yet, of adding a firing squad and gas as legal ways to execute someone in Indiana. And what I found was that morning that I had looked it up, I had seen there was a new article released where they came back to that law and decided that, we are not going to make it legal to kill people through gas, but we are going to continue or let the firing law go ahead. And we are also proposing that a member of the press be there at all times that there was a execution. And that is the law, that is how the law was revised. And so I think it's important to realize that spreading information too early or of things that haven't necessarily even gone into place yet can distract or have people focused on the wrong things. And I think that's incredibly important where we're faced with a time where we need to be very specific about what legislators need to do in order for us to feel safe and feel we do not live in a dictatorship in the U.S. And I think that my example that I just gave really shows that, there are people there. I really refuse to believe that everyone in the government is a bad person and that there are people who want to do the right thing. And so if we are saying, we gotta, if we're spreading this information that there's gas chambers, that's horrifying. That's creating so much swirl and fear among everyone. And that's honestly, that's going to paralyze people more than it is going to encourage them to speak up and be open and vocal about what is going on and what they're unhappy about and what needs to be fixed. And so that is kind of my main focus is if you see misinformation online, put in the comments about how it is untrue. And if you look in the comments of a lot of things, if there is misinformation, there's already people calling it out. Your nervous system can still have a reaction to that information that is negative and that is going to affect you because people are profiting off of this false information and your emotions. They're profiting on making you feel terrible and like the world is ending and like there's nothing you can do. And that's exactly how society collapses. When people feel like there is nothing that they can do, which is absolutely not true. You can do something. You can use your voice. You can speak out. You can advocate for the truth. You can call out when people are spreading false information. You can help redirect people to problems at large. And I think that is what is so important and essentially what the next steps are for U.S. citizens specifically. So if you listened to this whole episode, thank you so much. I know it was a super long one compared to my usual episodes, but I had some very important information that I wanted to cover in detail so that people are informed and are aware. And if you cannot guarantee the source, you just have to be skeptical because of AI and works on that skill of identifying truth, recognizing signs of AI, things like that, so that they can properly discern and be aware of, what they are consuming and how it is making them feel. But yes, thank you for listening. I don't have an activity for everybody except, start practicing this skill out in your everyday. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Live, Life, Love podcast. As always, please share this episode with your friends and family. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Live, Life, Love Pod or visit the website livelifelovepodcast.com. You can find past episodes wherever you like to listen, and new episodes come out every Tuesday. Have a great day.